From here starts the speaking test. This is the speaking mock test of the International English Language Testing System taking place online in Ross IELTS Academy. The candidate's name is Eduardo. The candidate's number is 014257. The examiner is Mehnu Shafi, examiner number 443533. Good afternoon. My name is Mehnu Shafi. Would you please tell me your full name?
Good afternoon. Well, my full name is Eduardo Vinicius Gonçalves dos Santos. Please call me Eduardo.
Sure. Can I see your identification, please?
Of course. There you have my passport.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can now get started with the first part of the exam. In the first part, I will ask you some personal questions. First, I'd like to ask about studying. Do you work or study?
Okay, well, I have a full-time job now, so mostly I work. Although I can tell you that my student days are not behind me. I have to take some courses to sharpen my skills.
Mm-hmm. Do you like your current job?
I do actually. I mean, besides having long hours and strict deadlines, I definitely enjoy the challenge. It, I guess, forces me to become the best version of myself.
What job do you think you will have by the next 5 years?
Oh my God. Well, I've been working in supply chain and logistics for the past 10 years. I definitely enjoy this career path, so I believe I'll continue in this career.
Now let's move on and talk about languages. Do you think learning languages can help us?
Oh, definitely. I can tell from my personal experience that not only English, but also Spanish has helped me a lot to make important connections, especially at work.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever learned a new language or do you wish to learn a new one?
Well, besides trying to improve my English, I've been trying to learn French for the past couple of months. It's a little more difficult than English, but well, I'm enjoying so far.
Now let's talk about smiles. What are the things that make you smile?
Oh my God. Well, definitely a good joke. I also like watching some like sitcoms on Netflix, and those are hilarious.
When was the last time somebody smiled at you?
Oh, maybe just this morning when I helped an old lady that was like on the shop. I was buying something for my breakfast, so I helped her to carry some stuff, and she smiled back at me.
Mm-hmm. Do you like to smile while posing for photos?
Well, I know that's like the social norm. You must smile. I don't particularly enjoy it, but of course I try at least to fake a smile to get a good picture.
Thank you very much. Now we can move on to the second part of the exam. In the second part, Eduardo, I will give you a card with a topic and you should talk about it for 2 minutes. Before that, you have 1 minute to think about the topic and make notes. Now I'm sharing my screen with you just so you can see the cue card. So can you see it now?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Sure, I do.
You should describe a big company in your hometown that employs a lot of people. Now you have 1 minute to think about the topic and make notes. And your 1 minute time starts now.
Okay.
All right, now your 1 minute is over, and you may talk about the topic for 2 minutes. Your 2 minutes start now.
Okay. Well, when I first saw the cue card, I was a little bit unsure of which company I should choose because there are so many in the surrounding area. Well, I'm going to talk about this machine maker called Caterpillar, which is an American company that operates in the outskirts of my city. Well, basically, they offer a wide gamut of careers. Most of the employers are engineers or welders, I guess that kind of technical stuff. But also they employ a bunch of people in logistics, myself included. Well, besides that, of course, there are several other companies that supply the materials for them. So I guess it not only employs like 1,000 people, but it creates other indirect jobs, let's say. Well, I have to say that I think it's a big benefit for the city having a company like this because, of course, it creates jobs and revenue to the city. They pay a staggering amount of money in taxes. On the other hand, of course, there are some downsides like pollution, for example. Other than that, I'd say that because it is attracting a lot of people to the area, like rent prices, they have gone through the roofs, and that's of course, I know we have also COVID to blame for that in the past couple of years, but also the more companies we have here, the more expensive this area gets. So I think that's a major downside. Other than that, I can only see huge advantages.
Thank you very much. Now, this is the end of the second part. Your time is over. So I stop sharing the screen and we can now move on to part 3. In the second part, Eduardo, you talked about a big company in your hometown that employs a lot of people. And now in the third part, I would like to ask you some questions related to this topic.
Sure.
What is the benefit of working in large companies?
Oh my God. Well, to begin with, I guess large corporations, they generally pay a lot more money than smaller ones. Besides, like working there, there's more prestige, I'd say. Of course, on the other hand, like it can be a dog environment, and most people are trying to climb the corporate ladder, and they do whatever it takes.
Okay, and how about the impact of the work environment? Do you think that plays like the work culture and the work environment? Do they play any role in a big firm?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I have worked in very friendly environments, but also worked in some companies where I felt miserable because there was so much pressure going on, and like friends were like coworkers were not very supportive. So I guess it plays a very important role in our in our health in general, in our well-being. You know.
Mm-hmm. Now that we're talking about the work environment and companies, let's move on and talk a little about the future. What do you think the future of technology at workplace would be like?
Oh my God. Well, that's such a broad question, you know. I guess we could be talking about this the whole afternoon. But having said that, I definitely think that artificial intelligence is going to play a major role, especially making some tasks automatic. Of course, that can lead to job losses. And to be honest, this is something that keeps me up at night sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And would you like to get more involved in some companies or some firms which are into the technological advancements?
Oh, of course. I would love to work for the big tech companies like Facebook and Amazon and so far so on. Unfortunately, though, I do not have a background in IT, So I think that's out of the table for me for now.
Thank you very much. Now, this is the end of the speaking test, and we can move on to the feedback part. But before I get started with your score in each criteria and your overall band score, Eduardo, I just want to analyze your performance in the different parts, talking about the structure you applied, and of course what you're expected to do in the real test. And after that, we can move on to the score part.
Sure.
So, first to get started with part 1. As you already know, part 1 in IELTS Speaking is about short questions and short answers. And you know that you should give some short answers, but you always have to provide some explanation. I can say that you did really well in part 1 because even though you gave me some short answers, you knew how to elaborate on your ideas. And just for you to know, in the first part, the length of your answer should be 2 to 3 sentences, like maximum 3 sentences would be just perfect. But by that, I'm referring to some complex grammatical structures, not very short one-clause sentences. Generally speaking, your explanation in part 1 was sufficient and fine. Talking about the second part, in this part, what is necessary is to cover your 2 minutes. So it means that you have to talk for the 2 minutes. And if you stop talking before the examiner stops you, then it would mark you down. So because of that, it's very important to just keep talking. I noticed even though you didn't really have much to say about some of the bullet points, you tried to just provide some further details. And that can be very helpful. And you did well, of course, in part 2. So the most important thing is to cover your time and, of course, give some related answers based on the bullet points and based on the keywords and the tense you're expected to talk about. And just like the first and second part, in the third part, you also did well because you gave me some longer answers, as part 3 is about longer questions and longer answers. So just for you to know, in the third part, try to give some longer answers compared to part 1. So if in part 1 it was maximum 3 sentences, then in part 3 it should be always longer than 3 sentences, really depending on the point you're trying to make. And if the examiner keeps interrupting you to ask you more questions, that's fine, because the third part is like a discussion, and the examiner may want to challenge you. So this is about the third part, and that brings us to the first criteria, which is your fluency and coherence. In the first criteria, Eduardo, the 2 things that I already talked about, I mean the structure you applied and the topic development you have, these are evaluated in this criteria. And the good thing is that you didn't have major problems with those. Like you knew how to talk about the topics in part 1 and how to cover your time in the second part, as well as the third part in which you knew how to give more details. However, if you have hesitations, self-repetitions, and self-corrections, you would lose mark in this criteria. I can say that you did have very few self-repetitions or hesitations, but they were mostly content-related, the hesitations I mean. Like you were naturally thinking of the next idea you should talk about. You didn't keep hesitating because you didn't remember the vocabulary or grammar. And if you have some content-related ones, then that's fine. It wouldn't negatively impact your score because you might even have them in your mother tongue, even in a different language. So generally speaking, you know how to maintain your fluency as you are familiar with the strategies. Like you sometimes use feeders and boosters very naturally to buy yourself some time. Then you might be faking your answer because that's also another technique. So you did well and you could show a good fluency in your speaking. The last thing which I should talk about, something that you can still work more on, is about the range of the connectives and discourse markers. If you just use very simple connectives like and, so, but, because, you would just get a 5. If you add a few more connectives to that, you will get a 6. And if you use a range of connectives and discourse markers, you will get 7 and more. I can say that you didn't limit yourself to the simple ones. I could actually hear some good ones like besides, not only, but also, on the other hand, and other than that. These were some very good ones you used, and I could hear like each of them several times. So there was this flexibility in your speaking. However, I believe that you still have room for like a better flexibility in your connectives, bringing a range to that. For example, you use the word besides several times. Or on the other, like other than that, why not using furthermore, plus, or apart from that? Or instead of but, you can use however. Instead of so, you can use therefore. Instead of because, you can use as or since. So you can just get started with the alternatives to the simple connectives. And if you can add more, for example, you used on the other hand, that's a good one. Not only, but also. But you can also use although, even though, to show contrast. Otherwise, unless, unlike. So I'm not asking you to use all these connectives at once because that wouldn't sound natural. But if you can just use like a better range more flexibly, it can really help you get a better score. So because of everything I mentioned, you got a 7 in your fluency and coherence, but it's a piece of cake for you to get an 8 in this criteria because, as I mentioned, you don't have major problems with your fluency. You just need a few more connectives just to guarantee you're getting an 8.
Sure.
Talking about your lexical resource, your vocabulary. In your vocabulary, you got a 7 because you knew how to talk about like the different topics. Whatever topic I asked you, you had some collocations and vocabulary in that topic, which is a strong point, of course. For example, the collocations like the days are behind me, strict deadline, career path, social norm, fake a smile, to be unsure of something, outskirts of the city, artificial intelligence, out of the table. So I can say like you are using a range of collocations, but at the same time, I could hear some very natural fillers and boosters. So that's the second part of the story. And thirdly, some very good synonyms, like you know how to paraphrase well. For example, the word currently, career, benefit, downsides, or even miserable. So what is missing? Like you are doing really well, you're performing like really well compared to many other people, but why not getting an 8 in your vocabulary? The thing is, if you want to get 7 and more, you're expected to use collocations and idioms. Somebody who gets a 7 is using some less common collocations and idioms and is paraphrasing effectively. But somebody who's getting an 8 is using a range of collocations and idioms. I can say you have the potential to get an 8 actually in this criteria because you're paraphrasing flawless, fillers and boosters perfect. Collocations, you are using good collocations. So what is missing here is more of the idioms. Try to add a few more idioms to your speaking. And of course, maintain a better range in the collocations if you can. So you are doing the same thing, like you don't need to memorize anything new. First of all, about the collocations. If you get a topic which you understand, but you don't have enough vocabulary in, just think to yourself, how can I link it to a different topic? Like there must be some topics you are good at, like you wish to get them in the real test because you know how to use vocabulary in. So just smart enough, like how can I link it to that one? Because I know how to talk about this topic, not the one that I'm given. For example, just to give you an example here. If I ask you to, for example, describe your room, you don't know how to describe your room, but you know how to describe somebody else's room, then describe their room as if you're talking about yours. Because the examiner doesn't really care if you're telling the truth. As long as your answer makes sense and it's related to the question, they can't read your mind. They don't know that you're actually describing your friend's room, for example. Or suppose I ask you, what do you do to focus better while reading books? This is a clear question. You understand it, of course. But maybe you don't have very good collocations about books, reading, focusing. So think to yourself, what other topic am I good at? Maybe you can talk really well about food, diet, cooking. So that's how I link the topics together because I want to get a better score. I say, well, that's a very good question. Let me think about it. I'm buying myself some time, and you know how to do that. That's a very good question. Let me think about it. I should say that in order to focus better when I'm reading books, I should always be eating well. This is because when I eat in moderation and maintain a balanced diet, my brain function boosts and I can concentrate a lot better. So that can be a very good answer in part 1 because even though I was not really telling the truth, it makes sense. I need a better brain function and because of that I should have a good diet. So I managed to use better collocations. You can also do that. So the key for you is to fake your answer whenever you don't know what to say in order to maintain a good range or a better flexibility in your collocations. Secondly, regarding the idioms, just memorize a few common general idioms, the ones that you feel comfortable with, and then fake your answer and use them. For example, over the moon, it means happy, and you can use it in so many different topics, only if you fake it. For example, if I ask you, do you like rainy weather? Maybe you hate rainy weather, but you want to use the idiom. So you say, well, that's a very good question because I do love it when it gets rainy. This is because I feel over the moon as I see that my friends are also happy and thrilled, and we can get some time to hang out, have a cup of coffee together, and you keep talking. So this is how I use, for example, over the moon. Or piece of cake, a piece of cake. Like, it's very easy. I'm busy as a bee. I'm very busy. I'm swamped. So this is how, like, you just have a list, like a few idioms that can be used in different topics. You fake your answer and you apply them. And that's how you can get an 8 in your vocabulary.
Perfect.
Now talking about your grammar. In your grammar, Eduardo, you got a 7. But again, you can get an 8 in this criteria. Why do I say so? Because first of all, you don't make mistakes. That's like part of the story, part of the truth about your grammatical range and accuracy. The most important thing in IELTS speaking is to use everything correctly, to be error-free. And you know how to use those structures correctly, and you didn't make major mistakes with that. Secondly, you could use a range of complex grammatical structures. By that, I'm referring to relative clauses, subordinate clauses, conditional and compound sentences. However, the reason why you didn't get an 8 is because you can still use more conditional sentences in your speaking. You could use relative clauses and subordinate clauses perfectly. And as you used some good connectives, you managed to even make more compound sentences, or more subordinate clauses. However, try to add a few conditional sentences. Just show it to the examiner. Show that I know how to use conditional sentence. And don't limit yourself to 0 and first conditional only. Maybe second conditional, third conditional. And the more tenses you use, the higher your score would be. I could hear, for example, present perfect in your sentences. That's good. Why not using more future tenses, past tenses, present perfect, continuous? You see, just naturally. I'm not asking you to use everything at the same time. These are just some suggestions. You just pick the one that you feel comfortable with and you show it to the examiner. So because of everything I mentioned, you got a 7 in your grammar, but you can easily get an 8 because the difference between a 7 or 8 is in your flexibility. You get a 7, you're using a range. You get an 8, you're still using a range. But somebody who gets an 8 uses more of these complex structures. I say you can do that because you don't make mistakes. Finally, in your pronunciation, you got an 8 because your speaking is all very clear to understand. Your pace of the speech is also fine because this criteria has to do with how you pronounce the words. You only mispronounce the word hilarious. That was your only mispronunciation. But other than that, your pace is also important, not to speak too fast or too slowly. And your speaking is all clear to understand. Other than that, your sentence stress and word stress also matters because your speaking shouldn't sound flat. This is about your intonation, your rhythm. So if you speak too slowly or too fast and it sounds flat, you can't get a good score. But you did well today, and because of that, you got an 8 in this criteria. So just to wrap up, your overall band score in today's test is a 7.5, mostly because of the 8 you get in your pronunciation. However, I believe that you can get the same score, like more than what you got in the previous test, in the real test. Because you can get an 8 in either of the different criteria I mentioned, especially in your grammar or your fluency. Because what it takes in your grammar and fluency is a better range in your connectives and conditional sentences. And then after that, you can invest in your vocabulary because you can get like an 8 in your fluency and grammar faster than you can in your vocabulary. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you should know which one to invest in first. And then you can maybe focus on the other one. So you can definitely get a 7.5 in the test. You just need to get some more practice. Now, do you have any questions or doubts?
Oh, I guess I have only one question. For example, on part 2 of the exam, like, do I have to follow all the bullet points? Because, of course, in this situation, I had the cue card just in front of me, but on test day, I don't want to like stay looking at the cue card on the table, you know.
Yeah, you'd better cover the bullet points. There is no order to that. Maybe you can start with the third one and then you talk about the first one.
Okay.
But what matters to the examiner is to hear you, to see that you are like giving some details on different bullet points. Why do I say that? Because that's how you cover the topic. If you, for example, don't mention the name of the company, but then you say what the advantages and disadvantages to this company are, then that wouldn't make sense. So try to give some sufficient explanation about each bullet point. And if you have extra time, then give extra information about them. And there is no problem with, like, if you keep looking at the paper or the bullet points all the time. What matters is to just be fluent and go on based on the expectations of each criteria. You see, the ones that I mentioned. So that wouldn't be a problem.
Okay. Just want to wrap it up that you guys make a wonderful work on YouTube. I absolutely love.
It's our pleasure. I'm so glad, and thank you for the positive energy.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Then if you have no questions or doubts, then I wish you best of luck with your test. It was really nice meeting you. Have a nice time, and bye-bye.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Bye.